Hey, welcome everybody to today's Table Talk chat with Mike Brennan. And I'm just going to confess before we even start, he's been gracious to be on the podcast and YouTube video. I was late. We'll just put that out there. We're just going to talk about grace today. I somehow got our standard and Central and Eastern times. So I'm just telling you all, if you ever feel foolish because you're like, how did I miss that? You know what? It just happens. And so grace. So Mike, thanks for your grace. Let's just start off with that. We are now grace friends.
Absolutely.
We are now grace friends.
Nothing but grace.
Yes, nothing but grace. So so Mike calls me and said, hey, we're supposed to be on a call. I'm like, what? And my heart starts like pounding out of my chest. I'm looking through papers and like, what time? On my calendar. Yeah, I just transposed times. So grace, people, grace. That's all I can say. So Mike is a creative, which I love because I am not. Although we'll talk about that in a minute. I think everybody is creative in a different vein, like because God created the world out of nothing. So he is a creative. It just isn't in an art form that we would label creative. So God uses our brains to be creative in other venues. So let me first say that, but I appreciate people that are art creatives because it's a true, obviously, talent. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you see behind Mike's head, I know now we're all going to stare at your head if you're watching this, but you get to see some really cool artwork, some that he has done that he can talk about later, but his backdrop is way cooler than mine. So if you're listening to us on podcast, now you're going to have to go get on the YouTube channel to just check out the art behind Mike's head. All right. So Mike, first of all, welcome. Thanks for being my new grace friend. Tell us a little bit. We're going to talk about just your God story of God in your life and really your testimony. But talk us through in this season of life, what your marketplace ministry looks like, because it's marketplace business, but our ministry is us, wherever we go.
Yes.
And on the screen, if you're watching us on YouTube, you actually see his website that you can connect with him at mikebrennan.me. And we'll put it in the show notes on the podcast as well. So just tell us in this season of life, what does life look like for you, just in general? And then we'll backtrack to how you got to this season of your life.
That sounds awesome. Yeah. So I say that, pardon the pun, but I have the portfolio approach in my business and life right now. And so really there's multiple things that are happening and that's intentional. And so the way that I really talk about what I do when somebody says like, okay, so I see these different slices, I see these different parts of the portfolio, but like, what is it that you do? Obviously visual art's a big part of that, but I say I am a creator and communicator telling stories on pages and stages that make you feel seen and heard. And so when I break that down, really what that means is on one side, again, it's visual art. So graphic design is my background. That's what I went to art school for and was in that field for many, many years. Now I just do it on my own for my own company. And so things like logos, marketing materials, things of that nature. Yeah. I assist to other companies and individuals who have those needs. And then I also do illustrations. So a lot of things you see behind
That's amazing.
Yeah. A lot of things that really have risen up out of my own journey, which I'll get into, I'm sure, a little bit, but things that are more personal to me, things that, whereas design is really more communicating on behalf of somebody else's company and their needs. The illustration was really more for what do I want to say? What's important to me? What are those things that God's put in me that I want to have come out? And so it was learning kind of how to express that differently. So that's kind of the visual art side of the things. And then the other side is more mentoring and coaching and speaking centered around creativity and helping other creative individuals with their own journey. I know what it's like to be in those places where you feel like you're really alone. Maybe you're experiencing some things that you're like, we as artists, sometimes we want to feel unique, but that can also be a burden because then we think our problems are unique.
Right. And it can be isolating.
Exactly. Yeah. And so to figure out like, how can we talk about some of those things? How can we address some of those things and help people so that they're creating the things that they should be and getting those things out into the world because people are waiting for those things.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of things that we can get tripped up along the way on. So I talk about that on my podcast also, which is Creative Chats. I talk about that in context of, basically wherever I get a chance to meet with some creatives and help them on their journey.
So on your podcast, if someone were to listen in on your podcast, and again, we'll put these links in the YouTube description, also the show notes for podcast, what will they hear when they tune in? So if they're creative and they're like, this might be my tribe of people, like,
Yes.
what are they going to hear when they tune in?
Yeah, so I really try to have a variety of guests. And so I leave it broad to say creativity on purpose, creative people. Now,
Yeah.
the way that I break that down, a lot of times I put into these categories. I say artist makers and content creators.
Okay.
So one episode I may have, say I have an episode that just dropped today. I interviewed Michael Sweet from Stryper, the 80s heavy metal band,
Yeah.
Christian metal band. Yeah.
Yes.
They're still making music and doing some awesome stuff. And so I had a
That's
conversation with
amazing.
him.
It's like a throwback. My brain just like went throwback.
Yeah. Then they may hear me speak with a guy, Butch Hartman, who created the Fairly Odd Parents and Danny Phantom on Nickelodeon.
Okay.
Very, very huge guy in animation, in Hollywood.
Yes. Yeah.
And then I may talk to someone who's a writer, who's writing some personal stories or some novels and things. So I may speak with
some of us fit in that other creative realm.
Exactly.
It doesn't have to be art. See, I was onto something there.
Well, and I also speak with, and sometimes, people may kind of raise an eyebrow at this and say, like, how does this quite fit in? But I speak with, and this is the content creator portion, I speak with creative entrepreneurs, because I said, this idea of sitting down and creating something, we're not necessarily focused on what the exact expression is. I mean, hopefully there are some things, if you resonate with that you learn and glean from it.
Sure.
But there's also something about just the process of sitting down and creating something. And for those individuals, maybe it's coming up with content, for courses or for blog posts or systems that help entrepreneurs. That's still creating. And so I really try to cover some of those things as well, because sometimes there's this imbalance in the conversations when it comes to talking with artists and creative people, in that we're so skewed one way in our creativity, talking about the craft, that we don't really spend much time talking about the business end of it.
Yeah.
And if we want to make a living of it or monetize it in some way, then we really need to know those things.
So you're not the poor artist. So you're not the cliche of being the poor artist. Like, we might need to listen to glean from how to monetize some of that. So no, I love what you're saying. So now I'm just creative in a different way. I'm just not, I can't draw to save my life, but we're creative in writing. So that's good. So walk us through to where you're at now, but really your journey to get there, because we all love to hear just the stories of, well, sometimes it's got our stupid involved in it. All of our stories have a little bit of our own stupid that goes inside of there, and God's grace up on our stupid, and I know that might offend some people, like, are they calling me stupid? Yes, I am. Because we totally have days that we just are, and I call it going spiritually stupid as well, because it's like asking the 5-year-old, why did you do that? Or even a teenager, I don't know. And sometimes we don't know, like, why did you do whatever? Why did you forget who God said you were? I don't know. So I call it just going spiritually stupid. It wasn't like pre-calculated. We just had a moment. And so I think in all of our lives, we've just had those moments of that, but also circumstance hit us. And so then you have to navigate just life bulldozing you sometimes in circumstances. And then every season of our life is transition. We deal with a lot of young people, and they all think that they're young adult, because it's true. They make more decisions in that timeline that will affect later down the road. A lot of them are, what college am I going to? What is my career going to be? I'm getting married, there's this window. But then I tell them it is tough, because I really, it is a lot of decisions. And I said, but our lives are transition. Once you get this, then it's okay, a new season. And so we're always in transition, and how we deal with transition. Hopefully we mature in that a little bit. So just tell us your journey. And I'm sure, I'm guessing it had a little bit of all of those, like all of our stories. So tell us your story.
Yeah. So there's a lot of twists and turns, and I'll try and be as succinct as I can be, but at the same time,
We like story time.
filling in, yeah, and yeah, so I became a Christian when I was in high school, and so my faith was always very much a part of just the fabric of who I am and all the things that I did. Very much involved in leading worship and volunteering in leadership positions. It was my peer group. It was my sense that grounded me. So that was all very much a part of what was going on in my life, what was important to me, and what I prioritized for. And then also, obviously, being very interested in art. At a very young age, I realized that I could create something, give it to somebody else, and even if it made them smile, I was like,
Yeah.
wow, I have the ability to be involved with that.
Yes.
And so it was, creating greeting cards, or it was creating, certain drawings and handing it to certain, teachers as I was growing up. Again, seeing their faces light up. And so at
Yeah.
a very young age, I was very impressed with that idea of what I can create can be a help to somebody else.
Yeah.
And to do that as much as I can do that. So when it came time for talking about going to college, I had the conversation with my parents, of course, and I was like, I want to go to art school. And they're like, well,
They're thinking struggling artists, like you're eating ramen noodles for
exactly.
life.
Yes. So they were like, can you at least do something that will make a little more money than just drawing or something? And so I landed on graphic design because I was also very interested in music, and figured I could do some, album cover artwork or some other stuff like that. So did that, graduated, went into the field where I was working in advertising agencies, big and small, and did some magazine layout design, editorial design, all these different things. And basically I was on this track where, every so often, maybe every 4 or 5 years, there would be this transition period where either something internally in the company happened where people that I was working with were leaving and the environment was changing, or some instances where they had their own people and then they were like, hey, we got to let you go. And whatever it was, I found myself kind of making those transitions till ultimately I got to this place where I was in this position designing for this magazine. We had a deadline every 2 weeks. Great company, great people, but something inside of me was just very unsettled. And it was at the same time where I would do this work, this creative work during the day, and then I would rush home because at certain nights of the week I was involved in volunteer ministry. And I was like, that's really where I feel like my heart's coming alive, where I'm helping people or I'm making a difference, where something significant is happening. Whereas in my day work, I felt like I don't even have a chance to really enjoy what it is that I'm doing. And another deadline rolls around and just starting to become part of this machine.
Yeah.
And so I had this kind of point at which I was really struggling. And long story short, I really felt like God was calling me into full-time ministry, and didn't really know what that would look like. The area where I live here in the Northeast is not, it's gotten definitely more populated with churches, more, I guess you would say, more current churches, as far as style and stuff. But that at this point there weren't a whole lot of options, and I was like, God, I'm an artist. I don't know about this whole seminary material. I don't think so. I was like, I don't know if you know me, God, but
this doesn't seem to fit me. Like,
right. So again, long story short, my best friend was in a church. He was a youth pastor, and they were looking to hire somebody to assist with a bunch of different things. We were talking earlier. I said it was my first job in ministry, and I called it my slash job because it was nursery / college ministry / some graphics / whatever else that
cleaning
anybody else didn't feel like doing or whatever. But out of that, and it was a big deal because my life was on a certain track, right? We had just bought our first house. My wife was pregnant with our first child. All this was going on at the same time. And then all of a sudden it was like, hey, we're about to go in a completely different direction here. And so it was sell the house. It was, figure out what life is going to look like now, all in the midst of all of that.
That
stuff.
whole transition gets us all the time. Sometimes it's our choices of transition, and sometimes it's, you know what I mean? It's just life or choices of others. Yeah.
And it was, it was tough leaving a place that I had grown up in, not just, my family, but also my church family.
Yeah.
There was I was somebody who was very, even keeled. I
Yeah.
didn't like change. I didn't like, any surprises like that.
Yeah.
I wanted to just, kind of be, you know, just faithful and I'd be the
Yes.
person who ride it out to the end kind of thing.
Yes.
But God had other plans, as most of the time happens,
Yep.
and so this upheaval happened, and then I found myself in the world of ministry, full time ministry, doing all these things. And at this
Mhm.
church I was at, there was an evening service that I say, we kind of had a rock and roll church in the evening. The morning was more like liturgical,
Yeah.
and so the big divide there, and it was me and my best friend, and we were kind of like, you know what, like we're doing a lot of the things that we wish we had when we were growing up.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how we were designing the services with that in mind. And the thing just kind of kept growing. And then eventually we both felt like God was calling us to plant a church.
Yeah.
And so in 2005, we did that. And the thing just kind of took off like a rocket. I mean, there were so many crazy stories associated with that. It's like two guys who are like, how do you plant the church? And we're like, I don't know. We're going to
Right.
figure it out. I don't know. If God says do it, then you just go,
Right. You're like, well, whatever we're
okay.
doing in the evening, we'll keep doing that and just maybe tell people more. I
Yeah,
don't know. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
We try
but
to overcomplicate it sometimes. Yeah.
yes, but God led to certain strategic relationships and
Yes.
even relationships from the past where some things aligned and we got some training and we had a network come
Love
around
it.
us. And we actually even had people give us a building, a church building. Like they're
Oh,
just like,
wow.
here, and here's the
And that's,
assets
I
as
mean, that
well.
really is a miracle thing.
Yeah,
Like God is our provider. So
absolutely.
when he
Yeah.
calls you, he really does put provision to it. It's so good.
Yeah. So we saw all this stuff happening, and it was like so many amazing things happening, but so fast. And things started to
Yeah.
grow so fast. We had a very small staff. And again, I found myself in a place where, I was doing some things that were really not suited for me, more administrative, less creative. I had a
Yeah.
lot of younger people who were coming up in the ranks who were more creative, who we were trying to train up and give them the opportunity to lead.
Yeah.
And so I didn't realize how much that was going to mess with me,
Mhm.
not using certain gifts that God has given me. And
Yeah.
that coupled with, boy, the complicated ministry context of when you have your faith community, your family, your friends, your finances all in the same bowl.
Uh-huh.
When one thing starts to unravel, it affects
Yes.
everything else.
Yep. And
And
the transition's harder because you're so much is involved. I mean, your
yes,
heart is more involved. Yeah, you're
yeah.
absolutely right.
So eventually what happened is I started having some people come around me and saying like, hey, Mike, you're not yourself. And I was like, I don't know what you mean by that. I was so busy and so just frenetic that I didn't really have a good beat on my own personal well-being. And so people started saying, I think you're depressed. And I was like, how can I be depressed? I'm like too busy to be depressed. I really didn't
Right.
understand. I
Yes.
thought like, hey,
You're like,
being
I'm
depressed.
functioning. Yeah. Like,
Exactly.
right.
I
Yeah.
thought it was,
Yeah.
sitting around like, sleeping all day and moping
I'm
around.
not in my sweats all day. Like, how
Yeah.
can I be depressed? Yes.
But the
Yes.
more I leaned into that, the more I realized like, no, actually this is true. And, I started feeling like this knotted up ball of twine inside and going like, I don't know where the edge is. I don't know how to find the
Mhm.
edge. I'd always been very, just, uh, you know, I've been able to diagnose myself in a way where I'd be like, I'd look at my life and go, okay, I can find out what's going on and figure out like how can we fix this. Very self aware, and in this season, it was not the case. I felt like hope had left. I
Yeah.
felt like there was a darkness. I felt like there was the pressure of being in ministry, also being somebody who is supposed to be caring for other people, but I can't even be dealing with my own things.
Right.
And
Sure.
so, all those things ended up going away for some counseling, and just tried to make some adjustments. But really, at the end of the day, the question came up like, what if I needed to leave ministry?
Yeah.
What if I needed to leave the church? And that was a devastating question at first because it was like, how can I leave the thing that I helped plant and helped
Right.
create? Like,
Yeah.
what would I do? And at the
Yep.
time I felt like, I was chewed up by ministry, but then also I'd been out of the marketplace for so long that some of the stuff passed me by, especially in design world, because so much of it's technology based.
Right.
And so I was kind of just broken and just like,
Yeah.
God, I don't know what comes next. Like, I don't know what to do. I spent an entire year trying to find something and nothing was happening. And I
Yeah.
had this timetable of which, we were like, well, this is the day at which I need to leave, regardless of whatever happens.
Yeah.
And that time came and I still didn't have like that next step. And
Yeah.
so, eventually I had found a church and which is in New Jersey where I am now. And it was combining graphic design and ministry. So it was doing
Okay.
design, on staff
Yeah.
at a church. And I was like, at that point, I'm like, God, we'll go anywhere. We'll do whatever
Right.
you want. Send us anywhere. And he's like, go
Yes.
to Jersey, go to New
And you're like,
Jersey.
and if a paycheck is with it, that would be great.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
So like, God, send us anywhere. And he's like, go to New Jersey. And I'm like, no, God, like anywhere, like anywhere. And he's like, go to New Jersey. I'm like, okay, fine. It could have been California. It could have been Hawaii. It could have
Right.
been, but
Yes.
Jersey. Okay. So, but honestly, it ended up being a really good thing because it was hard, but I
Yeah.
found myself in the church environment, but I was not a guy who was in those leadership positions anymore. I wasn't behind the closed doors making the decisions. I didn't have
Yeah.
the authority that I once did. But God in his mercy said, we're going to pull the car on the side of the road and get some health and get some perspective and some healing.
Yes,
Um,
because God cares more about you personally than the ministry title that the
yeah,
world wants to put on your
yeah,
head. Yeah.
yeah. So, in the beginning, it was a struggle because, there was definitely some ego involved, I think, and some like just I used to be in those positions. Now I'm a guy who's kind of, I was like, I would say I'm pushing pixels. I'm over
Right.
here and just kind of like doing my thing. And then like, that's
Mhm.
it. And so it was a hard transition, but, I embraced that season as much as I could. And the other thing that happened is during that time, this was really significant. I felt like, God, is this it? Is this my story now? Am I done? Because I really hope not. I feel like things have caught fire and burned to the ground, and I don't know where to go from here. And
Yeah.
this isn't, I don't think, what you have for me, but I don't know what is supposed to happen.
Yeah, in that
So
moment, you're probably, like, sitting there feeling like you're sitting amongst ashes.
yes,
Do you know what
yes,
I mean? Like, if I just
absolutely,
had to, like, see a picture that you're just sitting amongst ashes going, "Now I'm just living to live."
right.
Like, yeah.
Yeah. So what happened in that, to kind of riff on the ashes, I felt like
Yeah.
God said, okay, the ashes are here now. Put your finger in it and then start to draw with it.
Wow.
And it was a calling back to my personal art. And so I had this available attention and time now, but I didn't, I was still broken, still like, I don't even know if I can do this like emotionally. All I have the strength to do is to show up for this next day and just do whatever it
Yes.
is that you feel like you're calling me to do, God. So I journaled a lot and I prayed a lot. And I just felt like I was saying, come back to your personal art. Do
Mm,
something because you love to do it, not for somebody else's project, not for
yeah.
sale, not for any of those other constraints, but just something because
Mm,
it's for you, for your own soul
right.
and between us.
Yep.
And so I said, okay, I don't know how to do this. I've had 10 years where I really didn't do any personal art. And I was like, how do I come back to this? And
Yeah.
so God led me to a couple of different things. There was a book that I read called The Creative License by this guy, Danny Gregory. And in this book, he said a couple of things that were really simple but impactful for me. One was, he said, don't get hung up on perfection in your art. Like if your drawing is a little wonky and weird and the proportions are off, like be okay with that. And some of
Yeah.
that may actually be part of your style. And that's not to discredit, obviously getting better in your craft and skill.
Sure.
But he's like, if you want photorealism, take a picture. And that really landed on me because when I
That's
was
wow,
younger,
so much you can pull out of that for every
yeah,
area of your life. This is
yeah,
so good.
yeah.
Yeah.
So when I was younger, I really struggled with doing that, doing photorealism. I couldn't. I struggled. It was a frustrating process, and
Yeah.
so therefore, I kind of convinced myself when I was younger that I couldn't be a great artist. I couldn't be an illustrator because I couldn't do photorealistic style. And so that's what continued to feed me on my design journey. But now it was like, okay, be okay with that. And then the other thing is, be okay with not doing masterpieces. Like, realize that you can sit down and do something and then it's not going to be a masterpiece.
Yeah.
Don't strive for that. And if all you have is 15 minutes or 5 minutes in a day, then do that. And so it turned me on to this idea of doing a 365-day art making journey. And at first it was very intimidating because I'm like, I've gone 10 years without doing anything. How can I
Right.
do a whole year showing up every single day? I'm
Right.
like, that's just overwhelming. So I said, okay, well, can I do 7 days? Can I take the next 7 days and show up every single day and do something, even if it's 5 minutes? And
Yep.
so that's what I did. I got a sketchbook, and I remember I have this I know exactly where this is in my sketchbook. I labeled it day one, and I went to the local Starbucks and I drew a Starbucks coffee cup, and it was awful. It was
You're like, I'm so out of practice. What has
exactly.
happened?
It was embarrassing, to be honest with you. And I looked at the thing and I was like, oh my goodness. Like, I went to art school. Like, if anybody were to see this, this is so completely embarrassing. But then
Right.
I said, you know what? I showed up for day one. I put in
Yeah.
my 5 or 10 minutes. I'm closing the book, and tomorrow's a new day. And then I
Yeah.
did day two. And so I kept on this. And then I would steal moments of like, hey, do I have a half hour during lunchtime that I can just do some drawing? Do I have some time at night or in the morning? Or
Yeah.
when can I start to do these things? So I started to do that. And then eventually it just kind of snowballed. And I made it to a year. I did every single day. And I was like, this is amazing. Now what? And I was like, I don't think I'm supposed to stop. So I kept going, and I kept leaning into the process and going like, what is it that I want to draw? What subject matter? What materials do I want to experiment and play with? What is this going to look like? And it started to bring some passion and some life back into me and some direction. And
Yes.
I kept going. And then I really feel like this is more part of my story. This is really more something that God wants me to move into. And I may not know what the particulars look like, but I know that this is something I want to leverage and lean into. And so I kept doing this. And to this day, it's now 8+ years later. I've done every single day at least one drawing or painting. In the beginning, it was more like a 5-10 minute drawing. And
Yeah.
then it got more as I had more time, as I made some more time, as it became more my rhythm and stuff.
Yeah.
I did some things like the stuff behind me, you see.
Yeah.
That all came about in a daily creating process. And
One of
so,
the I'm just going to interject here really quick.
yeah.
I've been writing down notes as you're talking, like these little things. And one of the things that I love is so much of what you're saying, though God made it so about Mike because he's relational, and about art in a very, realistic sense, like pen to paper, so to speak, that the thing that I love, one of the things that you said earlier was about like as a kid learning that doing art would make your teacher smile or make someone else smile. And so I wrote down it's a little horrible post-it, and it says really messy. It says stewarding your gifts to make people smile. And I thought, wow, if there was ever like a little meme, like, wow, we should steward what God has put in us to really, because what you did even as a kid was a act of kindness. It's a fruit of the spirit. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I'm going to talk about that in a second. But the other thing is you were sharing your story of just the transition, because I think that everybody can understand transition, whether that they have been in what the world calls full-time ministry, or their life has always been marketplace. It doesn't matter. Transition in life happens, but it's how God helps restore back your identity, because we can start taking on the identity of, oh, I'm a church planter. Like, this is my baby.
Yeah.
And we've all had moments in our life totally that are like that. And like, I love what you said about your ego can get involved. We just don't always realize that it's our ego and pride, because we can relabel it as something else. And I always say insecurity is pride repackaged. It just makes it more palatable. That if God is telling us to do something, we're like, no, who am I? I can't do that. And we do this whole insecurity and try to call it humility. We can say whatever we want it is, but it's really disobedience of pride, that we're like, oh, I know more than you do, God. I shouldn't be doing that. Do you know what I mean? And so with what you're saying, though, of that God's like, just do it for you. Um, and you showed up every day. And so that's what I wrote down. Just show up every day.
Yep.
Because as you're sitting at Starbucks making the horrible drawing of the Starbucks cup, it's almost like reusing those muscles physically, but also spiritually. Like that is a spiritual gift that God has also given you. It was like this creative art. And so being out of practice in a lot of ways of even being able to settle your soul enough to just do that. But what I love is that you showed up. And I think that so many times, I want to hear your thoughts on this, is that people quit, they don't show up. Because we don't do, the perseverance fruit of the spirit. You know what I mean? We're like, well, that's just too hard. We don't want to do self-control and long suffering or perseverance. We're like, can we just skip to love? That would be great. But it's actually God's love for us that he's like, I need you to show up. And so your daily time, whether it was 5 minutes or later hours, it is an act of worship. Like what you were doing, though maybe nobody saw some of those, it really was an act of obedience and it really was worship in its own way. What advice, or I guess not even advice, encouragement, or just part of your story, would you say in just the simple act of obedience of 5 minutes of putting your ego, off the table and your hurt off the table, because that's just a lot of emotions that you kind of have to sort through. It's really hard to sort through all that stuff. I totally get it. Some of our stories are the same, but different. But the reality of all the stuff you feel is very, very real. Doing those little things that ended up being a year, now 8 years later, but think back to day one in the Starbucks cup. What was the healing process really for your heart, your soul and spirit of just that one act that was just for you and God, that you weren't serving anybody, you weren't doing the to-do list of expectations for other people? Tell us just a little bit how that healed.
Yeah. And that's exactly what it did. It was bringing healing, and it was a slow process, but it was a process where I felt like God said, look, don't be in a hurry, linger. There's things that are going to happen when you linger that are not going to happen when you're just punching a clock to get in and out in 5 or 10 minutes. And you need to be fully present. You need to be aware. You need to be alert. And for those things to happen and for your whole being to be engaged, like you need the space to be able to do that. And unfortunately, many of us don't do that until we have to do that, until we're desperate. Yeah. That's the thing that becomes the driving force is I'm desperate right now because I don't know what else to do. I don't have anything else to do, But there's a meeting place definitely there. There is that healing and that time that also sometimes, like, I think we get tripped up in the particulars of what that looks like. Like I could very easily go, well, I want to make my art look like this, or I want to use these certain materials. But really what's happening in a bigger, grander scale is the process behind the scenes, underneath the surface, if you will, of showing up, of being faithful. And it's not about the product, if you will, of that time, but it's about the time itself. And
I think too is that sometimes we want to cookie cutter. And so we're like, we're going to go read some self-help books, and there's totally a place for those because they're other people's stories. So I totally, but what I love is that some people will be listening or watching, and they'll be like, oh, that really worked for Mike. And I'm going through transition. I'm going to go to Starbucks the first day. I'm going to get my journal. And even if I have never drawn a thing, that must be my road to healing. But it looks different for each person. You can't always just do what worked for them. It doesn't mean it wouldn't work for someone else. But I think the story behind it, the takeaway is getting that alone time of doing things that God has put in you, that you're doing it for no one else, but just because it's how God created you. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course there are things that maybe on a level of like principles and methods and things, there can be some application that goes across
absolutely.
things. But you do need to make sure that what it is you're doing is contextualized to your own story. Because too many times I think we are looking for that just quick fix of like, let me take this and just apply it directly to me. And then we get frustrated and go, well, that didn't work. And then we wonder why. Well, it's because We're not
Yes.
that other person. We don't have the same stories and experiences. And really, we should be leaning in and going, God, like, you're the one who created me. You know
Right.
me better than I know myself. Would you give me the understanding and the insight that I need to be able to maybe apply some of those things, but to contextualize it and hold things a little loosely and
Yeah.
say, God, I want to engage with you in the process of this.
Yeah. And giving him room to move you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then, so we have that vein of, it's not cookie cutter. You don't have to do exactly what Mike did. However, wow, if you are, that really resonates with you, there is a place to do what you did. And they're like, that God can use that as a way to get them on that path. And so let's just talk a little bit about, some of the things that you have upcoming. So about getting some people gathered that are like-minded as far as just their creative skills and just, how their brains work. I am a full believer that how God has created us and the gifts that he's put in us, he creates people to, our brains operate differently in a beautiful way. And so when you can get some people that say, I understand what art did for you. Like, I love that God used that. And just I think it's also super healthy to get people that are in those veins of creativity, whatever that happens to be, or in that particular season of life, whatever it happens that fits with people, that you can encourage each other because you get it. Yeah. Where somebody else might not understand it on the same level. And there's beauty in that. And it's a very biblical. We're supposed to rejoice with each other, mourn with each other. And he uses our stories and our giftings to even be able to connect with people on a different level, which is really beautiful. So just talk about like your heart going forward of being able to connect with people that think that I'm the only one that's went through depression. I'm the only one that took a break from art for a while. And I had to come back to like this love of it because God gave me that love of art. Just talk a little bit about that.
Yes. Real quickly, before I get into that, there's also something I feel like I want to touch on, which you said
yes,
before
please.
About the identity piece.
Oh,
and
yeah.
That was really huge for me too, because in the middle of all this stuff, I felt like I had these changing roles, right? At one point I was a worship leader and then I wasn't. And at one point I was a, full-time ministry pastor and then I wasn't. And all these different, I was a graphic designer and then I wasn't, because I was in all these shifting things.
Like whiplash.
and then leaving the church, that I helped plant and going like, where is my identity? Who am I? What is really true? And coming to God and really, I remember this really powerful moment when I was praying one day and I was journaling and I was really struggling over this. And I just was like, God, would you please show me and tell me, who is it that you say that I am? I know all these different things that I have interest in, I feel like drawn to, I feel like are a part of me, but I feel like sometimes it's all fragmented. Maybe I have a lot of different interests. Maybe I have a lot of different gifts and passions and things. Maybe I have, this sense of my world's upside down. I'm not really sure. I said, God, would you tell me who you see that I am? What's the name you call me by? Would you give me a specific name? And I'll never forget. And this stuff doesn't necessarily happen all the time for me, but this particular moment, it was like clear as day. God said to me, you are beloved. That is who you are. You are my child. Before you do anything, before you create anything, before you have any role or responsibility, you are my child and your name is beloved. And so that was so impactful for me that actually I ended up getting a tattoo. Let's see if I can get this.
As you were sharing, I'm like, this would be like the tattoo moment. I love it. Yes.
Let me see. I'll
Here,
bring it this way a little more.
Let me see if I can pop you up. Oh, yeah. Let me see if I can pop you up on full screen. Oh, I lost you. I tried.
I'm still here.
Okay, there we go. Now we can see it better. Yes, that's perfect.
It's there, and anybody who's listening obviously can't see this, but what it is this is actually something that came to me. I ended up drawing it out. It's a crown. It has 3 parts of the crown, 3 spikes, and that represents Father, Son, Holy Spirit. And then it's in my own handwriting that says beloved, and it's all capitals because I used to write my name and some things lowercase because it was more of like a value thing and not valuing myself. And so this all capitals was like, no, you are loved, you are beloved, and an exclamation point, and it's underlined. And so all of that was wrapped up into this tattoo. And this is the first tattoo I've ever had. And I only got it recently, and and it's not about the tattoo itself, but it's about my identity. It's about who God
Yes.
says that I am. And so, and it's where it is, because when I go to draw, it's on, I'm
You're
righty,
drawing me in.
my drawing hand, and it reminds me, I'm not this, I'm this.
Yeah, that's so good. And really, what I love about that is you are declaring God's truth
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
what he said. I mean, and I think that there is something that we miss when we don't declare out loud, because there's power of life and death in our tongue, of declaring God's truth about who we are. And so I've told people that I think we all need to do this, but when you're really struggling with your value, because really that's what's happening in those moments when we're struggling with our identity, is like we're not understanding the value that we have, not because of what we've done, but because God says we have value.
Yeah.
And of being able to just repeat it. And
Yeah.
it sounds weird when people first start doing it and they're like, yeah, oh, yeah, okay, I'm going to repeat this word that God has given me, or this verse. But as it keeps going, this like warrior in you starts to rise up of your identity and your security, to where it's like, I've said this, it's weird, but I love superhero movies. Huge, fan. But it's like the spiritual Hulk coming out of you, that you are like you're like, okay, we're transforming from being meek and mild to I can take on whatever is coming.
Yeah.
And whatever new transition, just because of what that identity is. Anyway, so thank you for sharing that. That is so good. And what advice would you give to people who are saying, I need to find that circle of people that more of Mike's, you know what I mean? Of just that kind of get that, and kind of going forward, what you're going to be offering, that they can kind of connect with you if they need just a space
Yeah.
on that journey.
So, that's really close to my heart, is because, again, I love helping people. And with the things that I've learned on my own journey, again, maybe there's not a one-for-one exact for somebody else's life, but I'm hoping that there are things that,
Yes.
my story is redeemed for helping other people. And
Yep.
so to create an environment where I can do that, where I can meet with people, and this isn't necessarily, exclusively a Christian environment. This is just me showing up as God has created me, and being authentically who God has called me to be, and serving the people around me, whoever those people happen to be. And so, actually, next week I'm going to be launching a private Facebook group that is people who are basically raising their hands and saying, yes, I am a creative person. And I have some things I want to accomplish as far as creative projects. I need some encouragement on this creative journey because I feel like I'm alone. Maybe where you live is not a creative hotbed of activity. And this will allow people, regardless of wherever they are, because it's Facebook, it's online, to be able to start to have some conversations and start to share experiences and start to share work, and then encourage each other in that work, and hold each other accountable a little bit. And then, again, some promptings and some teachings from me of some things I've learned along the way that I think will be really helpful for creative people, regardless of whatever the expression is, whether it's, a musician or a painter or a dancer or a baker. I'm hoping that we can all come together as a community and learn and grow. And really, at the end of the day, I want to see people step into those things which they feel called to do. Not only that they're fulfilling their own, calling in that, and their own just passion, but even more so that they can serve the people around them with that creation. Because I think that's where it needs to go. It doesn't stop with us. I don't create something just so that I can kick back and go, hey, I feel pretty good about that I did this.
Right.
But is it useful for somebody else? Is it going to be a blessing and an encouragement to somebody else?
Yeah.
And
Back
so,
to that, does it bring a smile to someone's
exactly.
face?
And so the more that I can encourage other people to do that, then I feel like I'm investing in other people, and I'm investing in people that I don't even know, because they know
Yeah.
those people. And so that's really what I want to leverage more of my time and my attention for, and my heart for. And so it's, like I said, at this Facebook group, it's a private group. It's going to be launching next week, October 2nd. And so it will be, I'm going to redirect a URL right now for it. It's going to be dailycreativehabit.com. So dailycreativehabit.com will go to this private Facebook group, and then you'll be able to get in there and hang out with me and several other people and build this community up so that we can encourage each other and help each other do the best work that we need to do.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. We'll make sure that we put those links as well in the show notes on YouTube and also for the podcast. And if somebody goes to, as we wrap up, if somebody goes to mikebrennan.me, which is your website, what will they find there and ways to connect with you? And I'm sure there'll be some links to that Facebook group, that will go up there later maybe, but just walk us through what they're going to find when they go there.
Sure. So because I mentioned earlier, I have a few different things that I'm involved in. It's kind of like the hub. So if you go to mikebrennan.me, you'll see across the top about the podcast. You can go and check it out right there on the website. You'll see my own artwork. So if anyone's interested in buying prints or products and things of my artwork, some of it is digital. I create work on the iPad Pro and then make prints like the stuff behind me a lot.
Okay.
And then I also have some more traditional media that I use as well. So selling prints or original artwork. I have also on there, other ways that you can kind of track along with me, some stuff that I put on a blog every once in a while. I have coaching services available also. So that if somebody's interested in doing a one-on-one situation with me to kind of unpack their journey and maybe some places where they're stuck, that I offer to come alongside them and help them in that regard. Yeah. And then also a link out to graphic design site, which is kind of separate. So if anybody's interested in any graphic design services, that's kind of all there on its own site. And then also there's another site that I have that's called Event Sketches, which, right now, obviously there is no live events happening anywhere, unfortunately. But when they were happening, people would hire me to come in and basically tell the story of what's happening at the event in real time through these event sketches. And so,
oh my goodness, I've never heard of this. This is so brilliant. Tell us more.
It would be, maybe somebody's up on stage, a speaker's on stage, and I'm drawing them while they're on stage, and I have the pull quote of something that they've said. It's maybe crowd interactions, if there's like, hey, everybody in the corner for the bull riding contest, whatever it is, I'm sketching that. And again, it's basically telling the story of the event as it's unfolding. And then the organizers, they can being use an illustrator
on the go.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So cool. Sorry.
And again, it's storytelling. It's storytelling. And so the organizers can use that in real time social media. So as an event is actually happening, they can post it on social media and be like, hey, here's what's going on, as opposed to just, photos that they would post. It kind of breaks through the visual noise. And then at the end, they also have a collection of sketches that they can put together. Sometimes I offer it like in a book format or some other things, depending upon what people want, just to kind of continue to relive some of that, even for the attendees to be like, oh yeah, or like, hey, I made the sketch. I see that that's my pink shirt, or that's my, cowboy hat, or that's my whatever,
Oh my gosh, I've never heard of that. That is like so brilliant. And how fun is that?
Yes. Yeah.
I love what you said about cutting through social media noise, because, it's great to have, these photos, and then you have the same type of filters that people use to make them all pretty, and it's all great. But how fun is that? That is so like attention grabbing of, oh, this is so unique and so new. So anyway, so I love it. Well, Mike, I can't thank you enough for one, being my new Grace friend, because I messed up our podcast time. And I know, embarrassing, but good. Okay. So we have that, but also just thanks for sharing your story. It's just, there's just power in storytelling. So friends, connect with him at mikebrennan.me and go see all the portfolio that is Mike's life, which is a great way. And I've got to tell you, I might swipe that whole portfolio to explain the different hats we all wear. I'm like, that's a brilliant way to put that. So I might also swipe that. It's so good. All right. Thanks so much, Mike. Thanks for being here. And friends, catch us again on our next episode of Table Talk for Called Together. Thanks, friends.